Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one we're going to be reviewing some of the community's teams ahead of Game Week 23. So it's where I put out essentially a community post at the beginning of the week. People submit their team IDs and I pick 3 teams from those IDs to review for not only Game Week 23, but I also look at possible transfers and routes that they can go down for the next few weeks. And of course at the moment it is very important as we are heading towards a blank game week in Game Week 25, and it will just help, I think, the community overall navigate through that without taking too many hits, hopefully, or even the need to use chips. So that's what this video is all about, guys. If you do enjoy the content, then smash that like button below. And of course, if you would like to participate in a future video, or be featured rather, then absolutely look out for those community posts I put out and make sure you drop your team IDs there. So let's have a look first of all at the first team that I'm reviewing, and that is Chat Stop Football. So team name Chat Stop from YouTube, and he's currently ranked 794k with 5.6 million in the bank and a squad value of 98.2. So in terms of his value, he's doing very, very well. Obviously 5.6 million in the bank, it pretty much means he can go to nearly anybody in terms of a move. But yeah, his team's shaping up really, really well. I've given him 4 stars out of 5 because, to be honest, I only feel like I'm not too sure if I could ever review a team as a 5-star team, because there's always something that we can do in FPL 9 times out of 10 at least. But 4 stars because I think that you are very well set up for this double game week ahead of us. You've got 4 playing players here in Ake, Odegaard, Haaland and Saka. Sorry, 5 including Ramsdale doubling up, which I think is absolutely great. Of course, you've got Matoma in there as well. That, yes, we know he's blanking in Game Week 25, but I think, you know, his form at the moment, you've brought him in at a perfect time and hopefully carries on delivering for you. Of course, Marcus Rashford there in the midfield, fantastic fixture again for him with Leeds. Now, of course, we know they are managerless once Jesse Marsch was relieved of his duties earlier this week. Kane against Leicester, look, Mr. Consistent, obviously scoring that goal against Manchester City. I think Leicester are an opponent where definitely this man could score some goals, right? So it's perfect really in terms of going into Game Week 23. But of course, I noticed that you do have 2 free transfers. You wild-carded in Game Week 22. You rolled in Game Week 23. So now in Game Week 22. In Game Week 23, you've now got 2 free transfers to use. So let's have a look at what I'm recommending for you here. I would suggest 2 options from a defensive point of view for you, and that is, one, we look at Fabian Schär out of the team. There's really kind of only one reason for this, and that is because of the blank Game Week 25. Because of how many blank players that you've got across the squad with the 2 Newcastle defenders. Of course, you've got Marcus Rashford in there as well. And Ivan Toney, of course. It just makes sense to start looking at removing these players that are blanking in 25 now and looking at long-term holds post Game Week 25 as well. So I'm recommending either the Spurs defender Perisic or Badiashile, I think is how it's pronounced, for Chelsea. So both of these are similar type of value. You get 5.5, I think Perisic is 5.0 for Badiashile. But I think both of these have very similar kind of fixtures in terms of the next few weeks, right? They've got good fixtures in 23 and 24, in my opinion. 25, they obviously play each other, which you'd hope, I suppose, that week it could potentially be a deadlock. I mean, you have got Harry Kane, so if you went for Perisic, you'd hope for a Chelsea win more than likely. But I think these 2 definitely fit the bill for you. And again, post Game Week 25, longer term, because you've already used your wild card, for example, you're not going to be able to necessarily navigate blank Game Week 28 as well, which we know will be a blank game week based on the round of fixtures still to come in the FA Cup. So we know Chelsea are a guaranteed asset that that are playing in Game Week 28. So I think it makes sense to target their assets. So again, this is a 50-50 flip for you, for Perisic or Badiashile, whatever one you prefer, I think. And then, of course, Ivan Toney being your second free transfer out for João Felix. Now, you could say that maybe you don't want to go down that road. You could have essentially approached the Andreas move to a Chelsea midfielder instead, if you like the look, of course, of Mudryk, for example. But I just think that at the moment, João Felix obviously did get that straight red card, so he's now served his 3-match ban. He's, of course, going to be in training with the team during that time frame. It may have actually given him some time to integrate quite nicely. And, of course, when he goes and plays West Ham and Southampton in 23 and 24, which, you know, these are pretty much clubs fighting for that relegation battle, right? Even now, only just past halfway through the season, these two clubs are definitely going to be fighting it out, which I think may leave some gaps if they're not very well solid at the back. And João Felix is somebody that, to be honest, from an eye test perspective, before his red card, I thought he looked really sharp. I thought he was linking up with Havertz and Mount very, very well. And this is obviously before Mudryk or Enzo or anybody else had joined the Chelsea squad. So I can definitely see that he will fit and be scoring goals for Chelsea over the next few weeks. And I genuinely just think his price point is a no-brainer for you to get rid of a blank player and bring somebody that's playing across game week 25 and 28. So that's your game week 23 recommended transfers. Again, of course, take this with a pinch of salt. It is my opinion, so absolutely you can challenge that or do something of your own accord. But these are definitely, I think, the strongest picks for you longer term. Then we look at game week 24 and 25. So we're going to start off with game week 24. And again, you've put yourself in a position, in my opinion, where because you've already wildcarded, you could probably afford to roll in 24, in my opinion. So you've got a snapshot of what the screen would look like there, where I've actually gone down the road of transferring Perisic in game week 23 for you as opposed to Badiashile. So you can take that again as that could be somebody else. But here you would line up as follows with Ramsdale in goal. Trippier has that tricky fixture against Liverpool, but in their current form at the moment, that could definitely be a clean sheet there for Trippier. And of course, we know how great he is at bonus point accrual, essentially. You'd then have Perisic, you'd have Ake as the other two defenders. You'd then have Rashford, Matoma, Saka and Odegaard, which is an absolutely ridiculously strong midfield, in my opinion, with a front three then of Haaland, Kane and João Felix. And I genuinely think that this squad is, at this point now, just by using those two free transfers, something that has a lot of coverage for essentially the top teams in the Premier League at the moment, right? You've got pretty much a bit of everyone. Of course, Chelsea have slipped down a little bit in terms of top clubs, but I genuinely do believe that Graham Potter will turn them around. I don't know if they'll make European places this season. They may be able to get a top 6 finish, but I definitely don't think we'll see them finishing 10th. I genuinely believe that they will be pushing now with those January signings and the strengthening of the squad and depth overall. I genuinely think that we're going to see them turn a corner. So I think overall you've covered a lot of different angles and a lot of different teams here. And like I say, I think you can genuinely afford to roll in game week 24. That then brings us into game week 25. So you now have 2 free transfers. And at this point, it is still a couple of weeks in advance. So it's hard to, of course, give full kind of, I suppose, recommendations. But I would definitely look at possibly removing Aurier. He's a bit of a minutes risk and rotation risk with Forest. I do like him as a player. I do think he can contribute. And he has looked quite threatening from an attacking point of view with Forest. But their away form is what worries me as well. It's not only his minutes. His home form, I think, would probably bag an occasional clean sheet. Maybe he gets substituted post 60 minute, but pre any conceded goal, which would be beneficial. But I think at this point you can easily transition to someone like Tyrone Mings, where Aston Villa, we know again, they're a team that play in both 25 and 28 with really good fixtures as well. They have Everton away in game week 25, and then game week 28 they have Bournemouth at home. So I genuinely think that that's a good move for you, and that of course still leaves you with such a large amount of flexibility with that 5.4 million in the bank. Of course, I've got Andreas Pereira as a playing player for you there. I mean, he is the enabling midfielder, so you don't want to give yourself maybe a benching headache later on down the line. If you removed him for somebody a little bit more expensive up to that 10 million mark, you would then, of course, kind of almost eradicate your front three formation, right? You'd have to rotate essentially a defender potentially in and out with that midfielder. You'd have to rotate a potentially one of those 3 strikers, which again, very formidable front three. You'd have to maybe swap them out for whichever that second transfer would be. So I'm not recommending you do that. Of course, you can see on the bench you've got the 4 blanking players in De Gea, Rashford, Trippier and Matoma. And at this point, genuinely, I can't see a move for you. There is every chance that Bueno does get a reduced amount of minutes for Wolves. We didn't see him feature in the last game, so that may be something that we keep an eye on over the next few weeks. Wolves do actually have a chance in game week 25 of doubling, but so do Liverpool on that same token. So Is there a possibility that you move that one Wolves defender to another Wolves defender? Maybe you do go for a Liverpool defender. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily, like I say, want to recommend that second transfer at this stage, but I think that really does put you in a very strong position, especially if you're happy to play Andreas here as well against Wolves, by the way. Of course, that then gives you 2 free transfers in 26, and you can essentially just try and minimise any hits or future possibilities of those hits as you keep hold of that second free transfer. So I think overall, mate, your team is looking really, really strong. Obviously, your wild card has paid off so far. I genuinely think you've set yourself up over the next few weeks to be in a really good position. So well done to you, mate. We'll then move on to the second team here, and that is a team called Manchester City. I believe it's Abdullah's team here. Obviously a long-term member of the community, always joins in with the live stream. So congratulations for being featured on today's video, buddy. Giving your team a 3-star out of 5, and realistically the only reason for that is because you've only currently got 2 double game week players, but of course Stones is currently red flagged as an injury concern. So I don't think he makes both of these games, to be honest. He may feature in one. I'm not 100% sure on his recovery time, but of course you've only got 1 double game weeker. You've also got no Arsenal assets in terms of that midfield. You've got no Nketiah up front. It's looking just a little bit dangerous for you this week in terms of you've had a few red arrows recently, and I think that these double game weeks, only having essentially Erling Haaland in the team, could be a major risk for you. So captaincy armband is on Haaland. Of course, there are, I wouldn't say benching headaches, but you have got Cucurella that could potentially come in for somebody here, but I just don't know who you would bench. I would try to keep your formation as a 3-4-3 overall, and as I say, in those defensive options there with Shaw, Trippier and Dunk, I'm not too sure that I would double up on Chelsea's defence, because I would definitely prefer to play Kepa for you over Ward. So I've gone with Dunk instead of Cucurella. That again is your personal choice if you think that Chelsea will lock West Ham out. But in general, for the fixtures that you've got on paper here, it's very, very promising as a team. It's just the double game weekers that I'm concerned on. So then that brought me into the game week 23 transfer plans. And realistically, I could only see 2 routes for you here. And this does involve a -4 for you. But because we've got double game weekers in Nketiah and Ben White, realistically, that minus can quickly get recovered. And pretty much, if White doesn't keep a clean sheet against Manchester City, maybe they concede 1 goal. Out of those -4 points, same for Nketiah if he blanks in one of those fixtures, with hope that they're getting at least 2 points, right? So that 4 points becomes pretty much a -2 for these 2 double game weekers, and it brings the Arsenal assets in for you. Now, again, it's important to note they are playing in game week 25. So this takes away Luke Shaw, that I think, yes, we do have a lot of value tied up to in him, especially if you brought him in earlier on, and maybe it's a slight risk in terms of ownership to get rid of him. But I genuinely believe that come game week 25, he's not somebody that we should realistically be holding on to. With the likes of Trippier and Rashford definitely we want them on our benches realistically, and probably holding them longer term. I think Luke Shaw could be the sacrificial lamb for you here, and in order to get in a doubler in Ben White. I've then gone with Darwin Núñez down to Nketiah for you, and to be honest with you, Darwin Núñez is just, yes, his XG numbers, again, we've spoken about this on stream and about in previous videos as well. His numbers are absolutely phenomenal, but his returns from an FPL point of view, and in general just scoring goals, isn't happening at the moment. Now, I don't know if that's a lack of confidence. It probably will just take 1 or 2 goals for him to probably kind of break that deadlock for him. But I'm not too sure holding on to him is the right move. And like I say, because we've got a guaranteed fixture in 25 for Arsenal, and of course we know Jesus still isn't back for a couple of weeks, I think you can take that gamble, go with Nketiah for at least this next 3 game weeks, getting plenty of game time, and of course that double game week in 23 with a lot of opportunity there associated with it. So I think this is a -4 week for you, Abdullah, and genuinely I think this improves your team tenfold. Now we go into game week 24 for you, and of course it is now this man's turn of Miggy Almiron to move on to that 3rd Arsenal asset. Now, the Odegaard and the Arsenal triple up, again, this is possibly not a priority for you on this week. Maybe you don't go for Odegaard, but I genuinely think Almiron needs to be moved on at that point. Not only is he blanking in 25, of course, alongside Trippier and the rest of the Newcastle squad, but ultimately you've got this amount of money in the bank to be able to play around with. I feel like there's better midfield options that you can hold long term to avoid the blanks and, of course, get that guaranteed upside almost for, they're top of the league at the moment, right, in Arsenal. So I think a triple up at game week 24 stage is very, very obtainable for you. And that does mean that your 3 transfers over the next few weeks will be bringing Arsenal assets in. And your squad on game week 24 does look pretty strong at this point. You could argue that Cucurella could come in ahead of Trippier if you don't like the look of that Liverpool fixture. Me personally, I genuinely think that because of his bonus points and his assist threat and just in general what he seems to do for that Newcastle side and the lack of creativity at the moment from a Liverpool perspective in scoring goals, I think he looks likelier to score more points than Cucurella that week. But of course, if you like the Chelsea double up against a poor Southampton at the moment, absolutely you can move that man in as well. And of course, John Stones as well. Maybe you get news that he's back, and of course he's got a very favourable fixture in Nottingham Forest. So both of those could come in at this point, but again, it's too early to tell exactly what to do defensively. And then for your front 7 there, again, I would say that's pretty much unchanged. Odegaard could be somebody else if we get a bit more information or something changes by this point, but I definitely think Almiron out makes sense in 24. You then have a look at game week 25, and again, this is about navigating that blank game week as best as you can, and as you can see here, that would mean removing Dunk and going for that same Aston Villa defender as recommended for the previous team in Tyrone Mings. It could be anybody from Aston Villa, to be honest. Maybe you go for Konsa, maybe you go for Moreno if he starts to get a bit more consistent minutes. He's definitely looked very, very positive from an attacking point of view, but I think those are the limitations really for me. I don't particularly like buying into Digne. I just think he's a bit of a risk in general. Matty Cash, of course, Ashley Young. There's a bit of rotation in that Villa defence to some degree, so I feel like Mings is probably the most confident choice at this stage, but again, that avoids any of your players blanking in game week 25. Of course, this does rely on John Stones returning and where he would have that favourable Bournemouth fixture, but if not, I still think you probably hold on to him at that point. Even if he hasn't returned, you would have 10 playing players here. Some fixtures aren't favourable. You've got obviously Harry Kane against a Cucurella and a Kepa double up there for Chelsea. But genuinely speaking, to be able to navigate through 25 without taking a hit, I think is pretty good. It's a good position to be in, and that's why we've planned up to this stage for you. So yeah, I think that you can easily navigate up until that blank game week 25, buddy. Overall, I think your team's in a pretty good shape. Now we move on to the final team here. It is Jedi Stew with the Jedi Warriors team. To be honest with you, he didn't actually enter into this week's community post, but he did enter last week's. There were a few individuals that did, of course, go across or put their team IDs in both community posts, and I just felt it would be a little bit unfair to essentially do your team twice in 2 game weeks, right? There's you've had recommendations. I think some of you have got plans of your own anyway, so it just made sense to use somebody else's team here that had previously entered. So hopefully you're watching Jedi Stew, and hopefully the advice is good for you. But I've given you a 3.5 star rating out of 5. Realistically, you're actually in a very good position for the double game week. So overall, that kind of half a star being knocked off in terms of that 4-star rating is only because there's just a couple of questionable positions that you've put yourself in, I suppose, right? We've got 2 defenders to note here in Kyle Walker and Azpilicueta. I think those 2 choices, I understand that, I think it was back in game week 18 I checked, you'd moved Reece James to Azpilicueta, which I understood because, of course, it is almost like a like-for-like transfer. But, of course, Reece James has now returned, and I feel like both of them will share the minutes, as I don't think Graham Potter is under any illusion that Reece James is still, to some degree, a little bit of a risk. I don't think Reece James gets 90 minutes, and I also don't think Azpilicueta gets 90 minutes, and as we saw recently, there's also that 60-minute benchmark as well, that one of these may not even reach that stage. Then for Kyle Walker, again, there's a bit of rotation there with Pep at the moment still, so it's a bit questionable on those 2, essentially, which is why I've given that kind of half-star knockoff, because I'm just not confident that these 2 get consistent minutes over the near future. But overall, apart from that, your squad again is in a very good position. It is somewhat template similar to the teams we've already seen today, but generally speaking, I think you've got enough differential here to be able to push yourself up those rankings. So captaincy armband again is on Haaland. You've of course managed to keep De Bruyne alongside having Fernandes as well, as opposed to Harry Kane. And I think that you can't realistically get rid of De Bruyne ahead of a double game week. He's been rested in the single game week against Spurs. I think, to be honest, he probably gets both of these games. So I think there's no real reason to jump off him. So I think your team is in a very, very good shape overall. Moving into the Game Week 23 transfer plans, I've simply just said to you, roll the transfer on this occasion. I think your squad is in a really good position. I don't necessarily feel like you need to change anything. Yes, we've mentioned that Kyle Walker may not get both games, but I'm pretty confident that at this stage you may as well play the double game weeker. It's very difficult to judge which Man City defender will get minutes anyway, and if you did make the move from Walker to Ake, for example, or a Kanji, who you may have a little bit more confidence in starts, this will be the week that Pep Guardiola goes and plays Laporte and benches Ake, for example, plays Lewis at left back, for example. I feel like there's too much risk associated with that one move, and it could end up being a wasted transfer, especially because it's sideways as well. So I think rolling the transfer in Game Week 23 makes the most sense for you. We then look at Game Week 24 and 25 respectively. 24, we've got Almiron to Odegaard and Azpilicueta to Bueno. So the Azpilicueta to Bueno move may seem a little bit passive at this point, but the reality is that your money in the bank of 0.9 million doesn't allow you to get very far from selling Almiron to anybody else. So I felt that it was necessary to just kind of apply a little bit of surgery to the team for the longer and greater good here, in that your defence had so much money in it across the board, from Trippier, Shaw, Gabriel, Walker and Azpilicueta. You're just giving yourself bench headaches essentially, and it always makes sense to have the enablers on your bench, especially if later down the line you're going to be looking at wildcarding anyway to potentially bring in a little bit more of a fuller squad to then bench boost later on. It doesn't make sense to hold on to this much value in your bench now at this stage, right? You want to free up as much money as you can in your starting 11 pretty much week in, week out, and then you transition from the wild card into the bench boost later on in the season if you do still have those chips. So that's kind of the approach that I'm taking. So Almiron to Odegaard I think is an absolute massive upgrade, and of course in terms of where you are for the blank game week, that now gets rid of one extra blanking player, as you would have had a bit more surgery in game week 25 if we don't do this move in game week 24. We then look at Game Week 25, and my recommendation for you here would be simply Luke Shaw to Tyrone Mings. So maybe a little bit later, and I know I've used Mings as an example across multiple teams, but genuinely, Aston Villa's fixtures from Game Week 25 are really, really strong. They've got a guaranteed fixture in Game Week 28 as well. It just removes a headache later down the line, in my opinion, as Man United could also blank again in 28 based on FA Cup results, and it's looking likely that that will be the case. So here, it allows you to keep Sanchez, Rashford, Fernandes and Trippier all on your bench. Of course, Sanchez, it's worth noting that in Game Week 26, there is a potential double for him, which is why I've not, recommended that you move him on for someone, or go, budget for someone like Ward, for example, rather than that Bueno move. But of course, as you can see here, you've navigated up to this stage, at least, you're navigating through the blank game week. You haven't taken a hit. And then from Game Week 26 onwards, you could then probably start looking at, especially during that phase, once we've got more information for who's blanking in Game Week 28, and again, City are another team that are looking likely that potentially could blank there. You've got free City assets, and I think during that 26 to 28 period is where you look at offloading someone like Kyle Walker. But genuinely here, I think, again, your team is set up in a reasonable position. I don't think Game Week 25 is going to be a showstopper week. I think a lot of people are maybe not concerned about it, but reading into it a bit too much. I don't feel like you need to take hits to navigate it, for example. I think we can come out of it even with a small red arrow at that point. It's all about planning for the future beyond Game Week 25. So hopefully that helps you, sir. And in general, anybody else that's of course watched this content that isn't featured on today's video, I'm hoping that the community can at least take some positives from the advice I've given. Like I say, definitely have a look at Ben Krellin's spreadsheet for who's potentially blanking and on how to navigate Game Week 25 and 28 respectively. Start using some tools to plan your future as well, of course. And as mentioned, if I do feature this video again in the coming game weeks, I'll have to keep receiving feedback from the community, I think, on this one. But as long as it's going to be demanded, I will put these videos out there. And like I say, at the beginning of each week, I will put out a community post. So if you do want your team featured in a future video of mine, then absolutely make sure you drop your team ID into one of those posts. And again, guys, of course, I will be doing a team selection video this week. I will be doing a live stream ahead of the deadline as well. So if you're new to the channel and you want to keep up to date with that, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. And of course, don't forget, guys, one final time to boot that like button below if you are enjoying all the content. So thanks very much for watching, and I will see you in a video or a live stream soon. Take care.